At 2:14 in the morning, on the 42nd floor of Castellano Capitol Tower, Manhattan glittered beneath the glass, indifferent and unhurried. Penelope Castellano stood alone in her corner office. Her mascara had run. One acrylic fingernail had split to the skin from when she had struck the desk an hour earlier. Through the glass wall behind her, 47 screens in the operations center glowed red with the same two words. System compromised. The trading core had dropped clean, the way a church ceiling comes down on a Sunday morning. A $15 billion merger with Waverly Industries was scheduled to close in 7 hours and 46 minutes. 3 former chief technology officers had already declined her, in the careful language of men who understood what trouble they were avoiding. She pressed her palms to the cold window. Hundreds of contacts in her phone. No one she could dial and tell the truth. A cleaning cart wheel squeaked in the corridor. Richard Donovan stopped at her open door. 36, dark glasses, navy polo with a bleach stain, yellow rubber gloves on his hands. He bent and picked up a small curl of acrylic from the floor and set it on the edge of the desk. "Do you need any help?" "A Brooklyn edge." "No performance." Penelope laughed, dry. "A janitor thinks he can save $1 billion company?" Richard sat down at her keyboard. The yellow gloves were still on. 47 seconds later, the screens turned green. He did not lean back. His fingers were already moving, pulling up a secondary diagnostic, and he paused and made a small sound in his throat. The sound a person makes when he finds exactly what he had been afraid he would find. Penelope stood 3 feet from the desk and did not speak. In her life, she had dismissed people for 30 seconds of unproductive silence in a meeting. Tonight, she only stood. The room smelled of cleaning solution and cold coffee. Richard scrolled through the logs. He spoke without turning. The breach wasn't external. Someone opened a door from the inside 3 weeks ago. Whoever it was, waited until tonight, the night before your merger close. This wasn't random. How do you know this? Because I've seen this pattern before. His phone buzzed. A video call. He hesitated, the hesitation of a man who has learned to live in 2 worlds at once, then answered and angled the phone away. "Daddy." A small voice, 7 years old, missing a front tooth. A purple crayon tucked behind one ear. "Who did you save today?" Richard's face softened. "I'm helping someone not lose everything, sweetheart. I'll be home soon. Don't stay up. I'm drawing you a cape. You need one. I'll wear it every day." Ava held up the drawing. A stick figure, in a blue uniform, a bright red cape. The word hero, looping across the top. "That's the best one yet." Penelope turned her face to the window. Watching that exchange felt like walking past a neighbor's lit kitchen window on a cold November evening, warm and private, and not meant for her. She had a 42-story building with her name on it, 2 Forbes covers. No one on earth would draw her a cape. She had never let herself feel the weight of that. The weight arrived now, all at once, in the dark at 4 in the morning. Richard worked for 5 more hours, quiet and steady. He did not look at his phone. He did not check the time. Around 4 in the morning, while a patch ran in the background, he leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then, without being asked, he began to talk. 6 years ago, I was a senior cybersecurity specialist. BlackRock, good salary. Then my wife got sick, pancreatic cancer, fast. Ava wasn't even 1. She passed when Ava was 13 months. I came out with $180,000 in medical debt and a daughter who needed her father home by 3 every afternoon. 8 months later, a firm called back. Senior position, 6 in the morning to 8 at night. I would have seen Ava on weekends. I said no. You turned down a senior cybersecurity role to stay a janitor? I turned down a senior cybersecurity role to be Ava's father. She'd already lost her mother. No drama, no self-pity, no expectation that she would understand. Penelope thought about the thousands of decisions she had made. Every one of them had been weighed against a career, a number, a trajectory. She could not think of a single one she had measured against something as simple and enormous as being present for another person. She tried to picture what that would even have looked like. Turning down a keynote to watch a school recital, saying no to a deal so a person could sleep through a night without her calling. Nothing in her adult life rose up to answer. By 6 in the morning, the system was fully restored. Richard peeled off the yellow gloves, set them on the corner of her desk, and took hold of his cleaning cart. On his way to the door, he spoke softly. "Miss Castellano, check who had admin access to the trading core at 11:47, 3 weeks ago." That's when the door opened. Then he was gone. Penelope looked at the yellow gloves on her $40,000 marble desk. They were, she understood suddenly, the only thing in the room telling the truth. At 9 in the morning, she called an emergency board meeting. The merger papers were signed at 9:47. Castellano Capital opened 6% up. In the conference room, Penelope said 4 words that had never been spoken there before. "A janitor saved us." Dead silence. But in the back room, and 40. 2 people did not look surprised. They looked, in a quiet, careful way, concerned. Vivian Bennett, Chief Technology Officer, 44, 3 years in from Goldman. Theodora Harrington, Chief Financial Officer of 12 years, 58. The woman Penelope had described in a Forbes interview as the sister she had chosen. Their faces wore the expression of people whose plan was not going the way they had intended. Penelope did not notice. Not yet. She ordered HR to issue Richard a temporary badge and an office on the 38th floor, and asked him to stay and audit the rest of the system. He agreed on one condition: half-days only, out by 3 to pick up Ava. That afternoon he sank deep into the logs. He found the IP address, the timestamps, the chain of permission changes. Every thread pointed to Vivian Bennett. But one detail caught in him like a fishhook. The entry point had been pre-positioned 14 months earlier, during a routine maintenance window. At a time when Vivian did not yet hold the access, she would have needed to do it alone. Someone had prepared the ground for her to walk on. Richard opened an archive he still had alumni access to from his BlackRock years. He entered the name of a shell company buried in the log. The search returned a result from February of 2020. A middleman, working through 3 layers of legal padding, had approached him with a specific request: gain access to the internal communications of a competitor called Harrington Pierce Holdings, protect a $400 million merger. It had been illegal. Richard had said no. Just no. The middleman, the shell company, the ultimate beneficiary, same ecosystem. 6 years ago, someone in Castellano's orbit had tried to hire him to hack. Now that same ecosystem was trying to tear Castellano apart from within. He sat still for 10 minutes. He understood one thing with complete clarity. Vivian Bennett was not the mind behind this. She was the hand. He walked down to Penelope's office and closed the door. The attack was launched from inside the company. Vivian Bennett executed it, but she had help. Someone with access longer than hers. Someone patient. Penelope read for 90 seconds. Her face did not change. She had trained her face for a decade. But her hands, flat on the desk, went absolutely still. She called Vivian in that afternoon. Vivian arrived in an expensive blazer, posture perfect. She glanced at Richard, seated to the side. Something moved across her face, quick and controlled, gone before it could be named. Penelope laid the evidence on the table. Vivian looked at it for 4 seconds. Then she looked directly at Richard, and a small cold smile moved across her mouth. "A janitor. Beating me." A pause. "That is not happening." She did not deny a word of it. She made a threat. "I will make this evidence disappear. And if you push this, Richard, Carlos loses his job by the end of the day. I will personally see to it." Carlos Mendez, evening shift janitor, single father of 3. Richard did not answer. His jaw went very slightly tight. His eyes went still. Not the stillness of shock, but the stillness of a man making a decision. Vivian left. Penelope turned to him. "What do we do?" "Give me 24 hours. What Vivian did not know, because she had walked past Carlos every night for 2 years without ever seeing him, was what had happened 3 nights before the crash. In the 38th floor break room, at 10:30 at night, Richard had sat cross-legged on the floor under the fluorescent lights and repaired Carlos's personal laptop, an old laptop held together along the hinge with packing tape. The one Carlos used to video call his 3 kids on the nights they were at their mother's house. "You didn't have to do that," Carlos had said, standing over him with a paper plate of rice and beans. "You've got 3 kids waiting to see your face. That laptop needs to work." Richard had not looked up. A thin screwdriver turned between his fingers with the precision of a man who had spent 10 years in clean rooms. "Sit down. Eat." "I'm almost done." Carlos had sat. He had watched. At one point he had said, almost too quietly to be a real question, "You used to do this for a living, didn't you?" Richard had shrugged one shoulder. Long time ago, Carlos had understood, for the first time in 2 years, that the quiet man on the overnight was not who he appeared to be. He had not asked a second question. Kindness that needs to be explained is not kindness. 2 nights later, Vivian had cornered Carlos in the service corridor and explained, in a low, precise voice, exactly what would happen to his position if he ever repeated a word he had overheard passing her office door. Carlos had waited until she turned away. Then he had pressed record. On Thursday evening, he knocked twice on the open door of Richard's 38th floor office and set his phone on the desk. "One audio file. You showed me that kindness comes back around. I want to return it." Richard opened the file. Vivian's voice, unmistakable. A second voice, a man, North American, somewhere between 50 and 60, speaking about timeline and about what he called the asset inside. The date stamp matched. Richard looked at Ava's drawing on the wall for a long moment, the red cape and the looping hero. He had not repaired that laptop to earn a favor. He had done it because it was the right thing to do, and here, quietly, the kindness had come back. Friday morning he brought the audio to Penelope on an encrypted drive. She listened twice. The second voice. Something was familiar. "Play it one more time." On the third listen she caught it. A single phrase. "The way we planned in March." The way the speaker softened the R at the end of the word. Penelope sat down slowly. "Richard." That voice. "I've heard it in my office every Thursday afternoon for 12 years. He waited. She did not say the name. Not yet. That afternoon Richard left the building at 3 exactly and picked Ava up at PS 321 in Park Slope. On the walk home she swung his hand twice, the way she always did when she had something to ask. "Daddy, who's the sad lady you're helping? How do you know she's sad? You come home with your sad face. Not your tired face. Sad face is different." Richard was quiet for half a block. "She's someone who didn't know she was lonely. She knows now. Can we help her?" "We're trying, sweetheart." Ava nodded, satisfied, and told him about her day instead. A substitute art teacher had liked her drawing of a fox. She had learned a new word, consequences, and she was not sure what it meant, but she liked the sound of it. Richard listened and did not say a word about a voice he had just recognized on an audio file. That Saturday evening, Penelope asked Richard to come to her Tribeca apartment. Not for work. Because she could not sit alone with the name forming in her head. She poured herself whiskey. He drank water. She spoke slowly, the way a person speaks, when words still feel like glass. 12 years ago I hired a CFO. I was 20. She was 46. She knew I was out of my depth and she never once made me feel it. I called her the sister I chose in a Forbes interview. I meant it. "Theodora Harrington," Richard said. Penelope stopped. I hadn't said the name yet. 6 years ago, a middleman tried to hire me to hack a company called Harrington Pierce Holdings. I said no. The deal collapsed. Whoever lost that deal lost a lot of money personally. She closed her eyes. Theodora had a $400 million position in Harrington Pierce through a personal vehicle. It was her father's firm. When it collapsed in March of 2020, she took an $80 million loss. She never recovered it. She told me it was a market event. I believed her. Silence stretched. "Richard, if what you're saying is true, she's been, what? Waiting 6 years?" Patient people are the most dangerous kind. Penelope set the glass down. I need to see the full picture before I act. She'll burn every document if she senses me turning. Then we give her something to reach for. They planned it across the night. A honeypot. A false internal audit, seeded into a corner of the system only a trusted CFO would know how to find. Its content would suggest an irregularity in the cash flow of a subsidiary. Realistic enough to be irresistible. Unfinished enough to tempt her in to clean it up. Richard drafted the file himself. He had learned, at BlackRock, that the most convincing fakes were the ones that looked as though a tired analyst had left them half-finished on a Friday afternoon. He added a fictitious footnote in the margin, in the shorthand of a junior associate. He misaligned one column by a single row. He saved it, closed it, opened it again, and adjusted the metadata so the last modified timestamp matched a Sunday evening 3 weeks earlier, a weekend the real junior associate had been out of the office at a sister's wedding in Vermont. Penelope verified the timestamp against the firm's internal calendar. Everything matched. Sunday at 5 in the morning, Richard took the train back to Brooklyn. Ava was still asleep. A new drawing lay on the kitchen table. A woman with a yellow crown and a smile that took up most of her face, labeled Aunt Penelope in careful wobbly letters. Richard stood in the kitchen in his coat for a full minute. Then he hung the drawing on the hook by the door. He had not told Ava about Penelope. He had told Ava about the person who needed help. Ava had named her. He was reaching for the cereal box when his phone rang on the counter. "Unknown number," he answered. There was no voice. Only video. Steady footage, shot from a distance, with the deliberate patience of someone who had been watching for a long time and wanted him to know it. Ava on the PS 321 playground, in the yellow jacket with the safety pin zipper, running across the blacktop, laughing at something out of frame, completely unaware, joyful, in the uncomplicated way that children are joyful when no one has told them yet to be careful. The footage cut to black. A single line of text. Your beautiful little girl would be very sad without her father. Richard set the phone down on the counter. He did not move for a long time. At 8 in the morning he called Penelope. His voice was flat. Careful. Held together with precision. I need to step back. I'm not putting Ava at risk. Not for this. Silence on the line. Then, your family matters more than my company, Richard. Go be with her. No calculation. No weighing. Just that. Penelope, who had measured every decision of her adult life against a career trajectory, said it in 2 seconds. Richard hung up. He walked Ava to school himself, all the way to the classroom door. Her teacher looked surprised. He only said, "Flu going around." For the whole of Monday, Ava stayed home from after-school care. Richard called Gerald, the elderly neighbor who had lent him a blazer once, and Gerald agreed to sit in the apartment that afternoon. Gerald did not ask why. Gerald was 71, a retired postal inspector, and long ago he had learned that when a man like Richard called and said, "Could you just come sit with Ava?" the right answer was yes. Gerald arrived at 1 with a thermos of tea and a crossword book and sat in the armchair by the front door and did not move for 4 hours. Richard sat in the living room and did nothing. That night he did not sleep. He lay in the small Brooklyn bedroom with the steam pipe ticking in the wall and the neighbor's television murmuring 2 floors up and the quiet sound of Ava breathing through the baby monitor he still kept on the nightstand even, though she had told him twice it was babyish. He thought about Claire, the last days, the hospital that had smelled of antiseptic, and the grocery store carnations he had brought, because the florist was closed and carnations were what they had. She had looked at him with clear, exhausted eyes and said, "Don't let our daughter grow up in a world where good people are too afraid to do the right thing." He lay there until the room went pale gray with morning. He thought about Ava in the next room, 7 years old, asleep with her cheek on one drawing and a half-finished one beside her pillow. He thought about what Claire would have said. She would have said, "Richard, if somebody is threatening our child, you do not step back. You step closer. You plant your feet, and then you finish what has been started." At 5:47, he called Penelope back. "We finish this. My way. Carefully. with everything accounted for. Tell me what you need. He walked her through it. A confidential NYPD tip through a detective in the 78th Precinct whose wife had taught beside Claire at PS 321. An FBI cybercrime liaison through Penelope's personal counsel. A private security officer at PS 321 disguised as a substitute parent volunteer. The honeypot live at 8 on Tuesday. Carlos on the evening shift has the audio. I want him on paid leave starting tomorrow. Full salary, 1 month. I don't want him in the building when this breaks. Done. One more thing. Ava doesn't know any of this. Ever. Tuesday at 7:30, Richard was in Brooklyn with Ava, who was drawing at the kitchen table. Today's drawing showed 3 figures beside an oak tree. A man, a little girl in a yellow jacket, a dark-haired woman. Ava was filling in the oak tree with careful small strokes of brown crayon, the way she always did when a picture mattered to her, 1 leaf at a time. Who's this one, Daddy? You tell me. I think she's the sad lady. But she's not sad in the picture. Richard kissed the top of her head and did not trust himself to answer. Through the kitchen window, the first pale light caught the rooftops of Park Slope, and somewhere out there a plan he had drafted 2 nights ago was about to unfold, and all he could do was trust it and wait. At 11:30, Penelope sat in front of her laptop on the 42nd floor, with FBI cybercrime agent Daniel Park on the line. Theodora had opened her laptop at 8. At 9:47, she had touched the honeypot file she was not supposed to have access to. A silent program had activated in the background and pulled back 3 years of her complete access history, timestamp by timestamp. She had edited the file at 10:02. She had attempted to erase the log at 10:18. Every step was preserved. At 12:10, 2 federal investigators walked Theodora into a glass-walled conference room. Her private counsel arrived 40 minutes later. The evidence sat on the table in a plain manila folder. The woman who had stood in every milestone photograph of Penelope's adult life, steady, composed, slightly to the left, sat with her hands folded and said nothing for a long time. Then she confessed. All of it. Vivian had been the instrument. Theodora had supplied the target, the timeline, the plan. 6 years of patience. The reason was Harrington Pierce. She said it without drama, the way a person reads a line from a long-rehearsed speech. Penelope watched her through the glass for the full 16 minutes of the confession and understood, with a clarity that came too late to help, that she had never actually known this woman at all. She had known a performance, a very good one, for 12 years. But it was not that confession that broke Penelope open. At 2 in the afternoon, Richard called from Brooklyn. His voice was different, quieter, deeper. Penelope. I ran a secondary audit on Theodora's subsidiary portfolio while the federals were processing. There's something you need to see. He sent a file. A cost reduction report from March of 2020, filed by a subsidiary called Medicor Partners, a small company that managed insurance pre-authorization for a chain of Brooklyn hospitals, Mount Sinai Brooklyn among them. Medicor was a wholly owned subsidiary of Castellano Capital. The approving signature at the bottom was Theodora Harrington's. The decision had reduced the pre-authorization staff for oncology cases classified as non-emergent by 30%. The consequence, in April of that year, had been a 4-week delay on a pre-authorization for a stage 4 pancreatic cancer patient named Claire Donovan. Claire had begun chemotherapy 4 weeks late. She had died that November. Not deliberate, not malicious. Just the cold, indifferent consequence of a cost-saving decision made by people who never had to look at the face of the person it affected. A spreadsheet entry in a boardroom had translated into something irreversible in a hospital room 30 blocks away. Penelope read it once, twice, a third time. She had not made that decision. Theodora had. But the company was Penelope's. The name on the building was Penelope's. She called Richard. Can I come to Brooklyn? Yes. At 4:30, in a light rain, Penelope drove herself across the Brooklyn Bridge with no driver and parked in front of a brownstone in Park Slope. She knocked. Richard opened. Ava was drawing at the kitchen table and did not look up. Penelope lowered herself to her knees in the hallway. Richard, I didn't know. I should have known. A decision made inside my company took Claire from Ava. From you. I am so sorry. I am genuinely, deeply sorry. No performance. The first honest kneeling of her adult life. He looked at her for a long time. He stood up from the kitchen chair. He walked to the hallway. He did not embrace her. He held out his hand and drew her to her feet. You didn't know. That's the truth. But now you do. And what you do next is the only thing that matters. Ava wandered out of the kitchen with her drawing, held up like an announcement. Your Aunt Penelope. I drew you before. Penelope had not cried through any minute of the federal process. She cried now. The following week, Theodora Harrington was indicted on 11 federal counts. Conspiracy to commit computer fraud under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1030, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, for the corridor threat against Carlos, and, once the FBI digital forensics team traced the playground footage through a burner number and a rented server in New Jersey back to a private contractor on Theodora's personal payroll, federal stalking of a minor, she faced 18 to 24 years. She was denied bail. Her personal assets were frozen. Her Connecticut house, her Hamptons house, the $300,000 wine collection she had built in the Manhattan apartment she had bought the year Penelope made her CFO, all of it, frozen by court order inside of 72 hours. Vivian Bennett was indicted on 4 counts of conspiracy and computer fraud. She accepted a plea deal of 7 years, in exchange for full cooperation. The FBI kept her in protective custody for the first month, because the list of people Theodora had been willing to pay to threaten a child was longer than any of them had expected. Penelope dismissed 2 board members who had been aware of fragments of the plan and had chosen to stay quiet. She did a harder thing next. She retained a third-party firm to audit every cost reduction decision made by every Castellano Capital subsidiary from 2018 forward. The preliminary estimate placed the likely settlement exposure near $140 million across multiple patients whose treatments had been delayed by Medicor's cuts. She announced all of it publicly. No PR spin. The Wall Street Journal ran the story on page 1. The stock dropped 11% over 2 trading days, then recovered. 2 days after the recovery, her head of investor relations told her quietly that 6 major pension funds had increased their positions. Penelope had not expected that. She did not know what to do with it. She called Richard. I'm creating a fund. The Claire Donovan Medical Access Fund. $200 million in endowment. It covers pre-authorization advocacy for oncology patients at every hospital underserved by Medicor's cuts. Permanent. Independent board. I'm funding it from my personal stake. Not the company. He was quiet for a long moment. Does Ava know? Not yet. I want you to tell her if you want to. In your own time. Penelope. Thank you. She did not say you're welcome. No. Thank you. For letting me do something real. That evening, Richard sat with Ava on the sofa and told her, in the language of a 7-year-old, that the woman who had hurt Mommy's hospital was going far away and would not come back, and that Aunt Penelope was building a place to help other mommies get their medicine in time, and that the place would carry Mommy's name. Ava listened with the focused seriousness she brought to important things. Then she said, Mommy would like that. She would. Can Aunt Penelope come over for pasta on Friday? Yes, sweetheart. I think she'd like that very much. On Friday, Penelope arrived in Park Slope with grocery store daisies, because Ava had taught her the week before which flowers looked like they were trying their best, and a blue lollipop, because Ava had declared that blue was the best color for hero capes. Ava opened the door before Richard could reach it, threw her arms around Penelope's waist, and held on without a second of hesitation. The absolute confidence of a child who has decided you belong to her and considers the matter settled. A month later, at an all-staff meeting, Penelope stood in front of every Castellano Capital employee and made 3 announcements. The first was a new program. The Second Chance Program, a paid re-entry pathway for professionals who had stepped away from their careers to care for a family member, paired with guaranteed flexible scheduling for single parents. It was, she said, A model she had learned from one person, a man who had turned down a senior offer in 2021 to stay home with his 13-month-old daughter. Applications would open the following Monday. Priority placement would go to parents of young children and to caregivers returning from a bereavement leave of 1 year or longer. The second was the creation of a new division on the 38th floor where Richard had done his audit, the Ava Donovan Cyber Defense Center, specialty, insider threat detection, the exact thing that had saved Castellano Capital on a Tuesday morning in January, opening budget, $75 million. Founding director, Richard Donovan, senior director, half-days only, non-negotiable. Penelope did not explain the half-days clause. Anyone who needed it explained, she said, had missed the point of the first announcement. The third was that Penelope was stepping down as chairman of the Castellano Capital Foundation in favor of an independent and diverse board. She would remain a donor. She wanted the company to be watched by people who were not her. The room was silent, a different silence than the week before. This one had warmth in it. Richard was not at the meeting. He was walking Ava to school. When the offer letter reached him at 11:30 in the morning, he read it once, thought for a moment, and called Penelope with exactly one condition. 3 sentences. Half-days only. Drop off in the morning. Pick up every afternoon at 3, without exception. Penelope agreed before he finished the third sentence. There was a small ceremony the day the Cybersecurity Center opened. A polished bronze plaque beside the entrance. Ava Donovan Cyber Defense Center. Richard stood in front of it in a borrowed blazer from Gerald, because his own had a fraying cuff and he had not yet gotten around to mending it. He would buy his own on Monday. Ava stood beside him in the yellow jacket, holding a bouquet of grocery store daisies she had selected because, she explained to anyone who would listen, they looked like they were trying their best. She studied the plaque for a long, serious moment. That's my name. It is. Will it stay there a long time? A very long time. She nodded once with the gravity of a person accepting a significant responsibility. Then she tucked the daisies more firmly under her arm and declared that she was ready for lunch. Penelope stood behind them. She did not step up to speak. She only watched. Beside her stood Carlos Mendez, who had returned from leave and been promoted to facilities supervisor with a $38,000 raise. His 3 children stood next to him. His youngest, Mateo, 6 years old, tugged on his sleeve and asked if Ava was the girl with the cape drawing. Carlos said yes. Mateo asked if he could make a cape drawing too. Carlos said of course. Mateo asked for whom. Mateo said, for you. Carlos laid his hand on top of Mateo's head and did not answer right away, because there was no answer to a sentence like that except to stand still and receive it. The press photographer did not catch that moment. It was the thing Richard and Penelope had both, independently, come to understand over the previous weeks. The seconds that mattered most never made it onto the plaques. 6 months passed. On a Sunday evening in July, in a soft Manhattan rain, Penelope drove herself across the Brooklyn Bridge alone. She had driven this route every Friday for 5 months. Tonight she carried a package wrapped in brown paper with a yellow ribbon. Ava had the ribbon off in approximately 1 second. Inside was a painting. A real watercolor, commissioned from a real artist in the Hudson Valley, whose work Penelope had quietly collected for the last 6 years, but had never told anyone about. A man with warm blue eyes and slightly unruly brown hair. A little girl in a yellow jacket with a crayon behind her ear. A woman beside them, dark-haired, steady, wearing a smile that had needed time to become real but now clearly intended to stay. The 3 of them stood close together, shoulders nearly touching, in the soft wash of an afternoon light that did not belong to any particular season and therefore belonged to all of them. Ava traced all 3 figures slowly with one finger. Then she looked up at both adults with the uncomplicated certainty of a 7-year-old. This is our family now. It was not a question. No one spoke for a moment. Ava carried the painting into the kitchen and set it on the windowsill beside the photograph of Claire, the small painted rock with the word home in a child's handwriting, and the dried flower in a jam jar, the only empty space on the shelf. She straightened the painting carefully, then said, without turning around, Okay, I'm doing homework now. And she walked upstairs. Penelope and Richard stood in the kitchen beside the window. The painting was between them. Richard. 6 months ago, I would have said, I saved this company. Now I understand. You saved the person running it. You did the work, Penelope. I did the work because you let me see what was worth saving. He set his hand on the edge of the counter. Penelope. I haven't dated since Claire. I don't know how. And Ava has to come first. Always, I know. I'm not asking you to know how. I'm not asking Ava to come second. I'm asking, do you want to try? He was silent for a long time. He looked at the painting. He looked at Claire's photograph beside it. He thought about the shelf, and about the empty space that had just been filled, and about who had filled it, and who had arranged it, and who had stepped back and let them stand alone in this kitchen to have exactly this conversation. A 7-year-old was a better negotiator than any board member he had ever read about. She had not argued her position. She had built it on a windowsill and walked away and trusted them to notice. Ava put the painting on the shelf next to Claire's photo. She wouldn't have done that if she didn't already know. And you? He looked at her. I've known since the night you stayed in the office at 2 in the morning and didn't leave when I found the second screen. Okay. I've known since the morning you told me to go be with my daughter before you finished your own sentence about saving your company. I've known since the afternoon you knelt in this hallway and didn't ask for forgiveness, only to be honest. I've known longer than I have been willing to say. She crossed the kitchen to him and put her hand on his face. Then say yes. Yes. He kissed her, lightly, slowly, without rushing. 6 years. No one could rush that. Upstairs, Ava was sounding out the word kindness in her homework notebook. A year after the night the screens turned green. In January of 2027, Theodora Harrington was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was handed down on a Friday afternoon in a courtroom in Lower Manhattan. Penelope did not attend. She sat instead in a small windowed office on the 38th floor of Castellano Capitol Tower and listened to the verdict on a news feed with the sound turned low, and then she closed the browser and went back to work. $47 million in settlement payments had been distributed in full to the families affected by the Medicare cuts of 2020. The Claire Donovan Medical Access Fund had supported pre-authorization for 1,847 patients in its first 12 months. One of them, Marta Rodriguez, 34, mother of 2, sent Richard a handwritten letter. I got my chemo on time. My daughter turns 5 next week. Thank you. Richard kept the letter in a wooden box on his dresser beside the photograph of Claire. Carlos Mendez had moved his oldest son, Luis, into the computer science summer program funded by the Ava Donovan Center. Luis was 13 and wanted to become a cybersecurity analyst, like Uncle Richard. Penelope had moved to Brooklyn. A 3-bedroom apartment in Park Slope, 6 blocks from Richard's. She had not moved in with him. Not yet. Ava had an opinion. You should stay close, but not too close yet. Daddy needs time. I read that in a book. Richard had asked which book. Ava had politely declined to say. On the night before Ava's 8th birthday, Richard and Penelope stood in the kitchen after dinner, doing dishes. He washed. She dried. Richard, do you remember what you said the first time you saw me sitting on the marble floor? The floor gets cold around midnight. Did you mean it literally? He laughed quietly. I meant exactly what I said. Everything else was what happened next. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Outside the kitchen window, a neighbor's porch light came on. The steam pipe in the wall ticked, the familiar sound of a Brooklyn apartment, of a life that did not need a 42-story building to mean something. On the windowsill stood 4 objects. The photograph of Claire. The painted home rock. The dried flower in the jam jar. The painting of the 3 of them. Ava had added a 5th object the previous month, a small curl of acrylic, the broken tip of Penelope's fingernail from that first night. Penelope had given it to her when Ava had asked what was the smallest thing that had ever changed everything. Ava had placed the shard beside the jam jar, and offered no further explanation. Richard looked at the shelf. We should put something else up there eventually. What? A pair of yellow rubber gloves. She laughed. Why? Because they're the only thing in that office that was telling the truth that night. Upstairs, Ava was singing something she had just made up. No one could quite catch the words. Only the tune.